I was being brought to set in a wheelchair. Like, I couldn't walk that far. So I had to tell everybody.
She used to run 5 miles a day. She danced. She laughed louder than anyone in the room. And now, at 54, one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses spends most of her days lying in bed, not because she wants to, but because her own body has turned against her. The woman who made millions laugh as Kelly Bundy, who beat breast cancer, who finished filming a hit Netflix show from a wheelchair, is now fighting something she says is the hardest thing she has ever faced in her life. And she's finally ready to tell the full story. This is the tragedy of Christina Applegate. The moment everything collapsed. Most people found out Christina Applegate had multiple sclerosis from a tweet. No press conference, no prepared statement, no publicist-approved announcement, just a raw post on social media in August of 2021, in the middle of filming a TV show, while her legs were already giving out underneath her. That's the thing about how this all unraveled. It didn't happen gradually in public. It happened all at once, and by the time the rest of the world caught up, Christina was already deep in it. She had been filming the final season of her Netflix series Dead to Me when her body began sending signals she couldn't ignore anymore. It started as tingling in her toes, just tingling. The kind of thing you brush off, blame on bad shoes or a long shoot day. But it escalated faster than anyone could have predicted. By the time production was in full swing that summer, she was being brought to set in a wheelchair. She couldn't walk the distance from her trailer to the camera. What makes this timeline so striking is what she later revealed. She had probably been living with MS for 6 or 7 years before that point. Looking back, there were signs during the first season of Dead to Me. Her leg would buckle mid-scene. She chalked it up to exhaustion or dehydration, and then nothing would happen for months, so she moved on. The show's producer, Liz Feldman, later admitted she had noticed something was off, recalling late nights on set where Christina seemed to be struggling to hold herself upright. But it was so easy to explain away after 14 or 15 hours of shooting. The actual diagnosis came after a doctor ordered an MRI and then immediately requested a Zoom call to go over the results. Christina has talked about that moment more than once because it changed her life in the span of a few minutes. She opened the call, saw her doctor's face, and he said, "I'm so sorry." He showed her a picture of her brain. 30 lesions scattered across her brain, visible and undeniable. Her response, in her own words, was, "No, please don't tell me this. Please don't." She finished the season anyway. She showed up to set, she delivered her performance, and she got the job done. The showrunner made accommodations, and her co-star Linda Cardellini was by her side. But behind the scenes, Christina was beginning to process the weight of what she had just been told, and she had no roadmap for what came next. What's interesting, and what most people don't know, is that it was actually her friend and former co-star, Selma Blair, who pushed her to get tested. Blair had been diagnosed with MS in 2018. When Christina described her walking difficulties, Blair told her plainly, "You need to be checked for MS." Christina's response was essentially, "Come on, the odds of 2 people from the same movie having the same disease? That doesn't happen." But Blair knew, and Christina has said more than once that if not for Selma pushing her, things could have been significantly worse by the time she got answers. The girl nobody knew was struggling. Here's what the public image of Christina Applegate never showed you. She was already carrying an enormous amount of pain long before any diagnosis. Her memoir, You with the Sad Eyes, set to release on March 3rd of 2026, takes its title not from her health battles, but from the little girl she once was. In her own words, it's about a little girl with sad eyes who ended up becoming Christina Applegate. The title is the first honest thing she said about her childhood in a way that the public hasn't fully heard before. Christina was born on November 25, 1971, in Hollywood, California. Her parents separated shortly after she was born, and she was raised by her mother, Nancy Pretty, a singer and actress in the Laurel Canyon scene of the 70s and 80s, a world that was equal parts glamorous and chaotic. Her father, Bobby Applegate, a record producer, was largely absent. And while Laurel Canyon had its romantic mythology, what Christina has described about her early years there is far less cinematic. Her mother struggled with addiction. In interviews promoting the memoir, Christina confirmed that the book covers her mother's substance addiction and the abuse and instability that defined the household during some of her youngest years. She has said that the worst of it happened between the ages of 3 and 7. She's been careful in how she discusses it, but the picture she paints is of a child who learned very early to keep pain private. Acting wasn't a passion that grew organically. It was, at first, a financial necessity. Her mother couldn't always afford childcare, so Christina came along to auditions and jobs. She made her television debut at 3 months old on Days of Our Lives, in the arms of her mother. By kindergarten, she was already a member of the Screen Actors Guild. By the time she was 15, she had landed the role that would define her public identity for a decade. What's important to understand about the Kelly Bundy years is what was happening underneath the performance. The show, Married, with Children, ran from 1987 to 1997. Christina played the ditzy, attention-seeking daughter of the Bundy family for 11 seasons. Her co-star Ed O'Neill has said repeatedly in interviews that it took real intelligence to play someone that convincingly obtuse, that Christina would nail her performance on the first or second take. But the persona came with a cost. She has talked about body dysmorphia that started young and followed her through her rise to fame. The scrutiny that comes with playing a character defined largely by her appearance on a show that leaned heavily into those jokes left marks. She was performing confidence and sexuality long before she had fully figured out who she actually was. In her own words on a podcast, she said she had been playing a character called Christina for 40 years. The version of herself she thought people wanted to see, light and funny and unbothered. She described her memoir as her coming-out party, the first time she's presenting who she actually is. The 90s and early 2000s brought real career validation. She earned an Emmy for a guest arc on Friends, earned Golden Globe nominations for Samantha Who, and her role in Anchorman gave her a different kind of cultural footprint. But the shadow work, the grief and self-doubt she had been suppressing, never really went away. Cancer, choices, and a body on borrowed time. Before multiple sclerosis, there was something else. And the way Christina handled it the first time tells you something important about the kind of person she is. In April of 2008, at 36 years old, Christina Applegate was diagnosed with breast cancer. She kept it quiet for 5 weeks. She went to work, hit her marks, delivered her lines on Samantha Who, a show for which she was actively receiving Emmy and Golden Globe nominations, and told no one. "I went through 5 weeks of work without telling anyone that this was going on in my life," she later said. The cancer was found not through a standard mammogram, but through an MRI her doctor had recommended because of dense breast tissue. The MRI caught something that a traditional screening would likely have missed: When the biopsy results came back, she got the phone call every woman dreads. What made the situation more complicated was the genetic layer. Testing revealed that Christina carried the BRCA1 mutation, a gene variant that significantly raises the risk of breast and ovarian cancer. Her mother, Nancy, had been diagnosed with breast cancer twice, and now Christina understood why. She had a 50% inherited chance of carrying that same variant. The mutation changed everything about how she thought about her treatment options. She chose a preventative double mastectomy, even though cancer had only been confirmed in one breast. It was a proactive, forward-thinking decision, and one she had to make under enormous emotional weight. She later said, "I lost my mind. I still sometimes lose my mind. You look down, and you have a daily reminder of everything you've gone through." She has also said, with characteristic directness, that it doesn't feel the same, and that she cried at least once a day in the aftermath. She recovered. She went public with her diagnosis and became a vocal advocate for early detection and for insurance coverage of MRIs and genetic testing, tools that had saved her life but that many women couldn't access. She joined Sheryl Crow and Suzanne Summers as public faces of breast cancer survival, but she brought a rawness to it that was distinctly her own. Then, in 2017, nearly a decade after the mastectomy, she had another surgery, this time a prophylactic oophorectomy, removing her fallopian tubes and ovaries to reduce her risk of ovarian cancer. That's 2 major surgeries for cancers she didn't yet have, both driven by a genetic reality she had no control over. She kept working through all of it. She appeared in Anchorman 2 in 2013. She starred in Vacation in 2015. She had a daughter, Sadie Grace, born in January of 2011, with her husband, Dutch musician Martin Lenoble, whom she married in 2013. And then, just as she seemed to have reached a place of real stability, Dead to Me happened. The show that would give her some of the best reviews of her career, and also the show on which her body finally stopped cooperating. What MS actually does, and what it has done to her. There is a version of multiple sclerosis that people know from general awareness campaigns, the broad strokes of a disease that affects the nervous system and causes mobility issues. And then there is the version Christina Applegate has described in her own words, in interviews and on her podcast, and it is something else entirely. MS is an autoimmune condition where the body attacks the myelin, the protective sheath around nerve fibers in the brain and spinal cord. There is no cure. The damage it causes can be unpredictable, ranging from mild to completely disabling, and it progresses differently in every person. Christina's case has progressed. She has 30 lesions on her brain. Her largest lesion sits behind her right eye, which means she lives with chronic pain in that eye. She has described experiencing what she calls a seizure-y feeling in her brain at times. Her right hand tremors. Her legs are unreliable. She has experienced periods where she cannot hold her phone, cannot grip a remote control, cannot open a bottle. I can't even pick up my phone sometimes because now it's traveled into my hands, she said on her podcast, Messy. She lays in bed screaming from pain. That is a direct quote. She said it on a podcast episode in late 2024, describing the sharp pains, the aches, the squeezing sensations, and the fact that she screams because of them, not once in a while. This is her life. She has also opened up about gastrointestinal complications that most people don't associate with MS at all. Since her diagnosis, she has been hospitalized upwards of 30 times from vomiting and diarrhea and pain she described as unimaginable. Her neurologist technically told her these weren't classic MS symptoms, but she's noticed enough of a pattern among her listeners and fellow MS patients to believe there's a connection the medical community hasn't fully mapped yet. She has gained roughly 40 pounds since her diagnosis, a side effect of the disease and the life it has forced her into, one of limited movement, constant pain management, and isolation. She now uses a cane. The first time the public saw her after her diagnosis was at the Hollywood Walk of Fame ceremony, where she attended barefoot because shoes had become too uncomfortable and disorienting for her balance. She explained it afterward on social media without any apparent need for the moment to be more than it was. Just a practical decision made by someone managing a real body with real limitations. The 2024 Emmy Awards marked another public moment that landed differently than anyone expected. Christina appeared on stage to present an award, leaning on a cane, and received a standing ovation. Her response, "You're totally shaming me with disability by standing up. It's fine," became one of the most talked about lines of the night. It was funny. It was also the kind of joke that only someone with a real reckoning with their situation can make. She said afterward that she blacked out, that she didn't know what she said on stage, that she felt beloved and also completely overwhelmed, and that the ovation, while beautiful, was also a reminder of everything she's lost. The hardest part, and what she's still fighting for. Everything else in Christina Applegate's story, the childhood, the cancer, the lesions, the pain, lands differently when you understand what she said in a recent interview with People magazine. Most of her days are spent in bed. That's not a dramatic way of putting it. It's just what's true. Moving is often too painful. The world outside her house has become, in her own words, something she doesn't really want to participate in anymore because it's just too hard. She describes herself as isolating, not thriving in isolation, not finding peace in it, but using it as the only coping mechanism she has right now. She said, "I'm isolating, and that's kind of how I'm dealing with it, by not going anywhere, because I don't want to do it." She has also been transparent about the grief. She told a podcast audience in mid-2024, "I'm still sitting here like, boo-hoo, woe is me. I'm still mad about it." She is not at acceptance. She said, "I'm never going to wake up and go, 'This is awesome. I'm just going to tell you that.' It's just not going to happen." She described waking up every single morning already reminded of what she has. And then there is Sadie. Sadie Grace Lenoble is 15 years old. She grew up watching her mother run, dance, spin on a Peloton, move through the world with physical confidence. She knew a version of her mother that no longer exists in the same way. Christina has described on her podcast how Sadie processed the diagnosis differently than adults might. Stoically, at first, in the way that teenagers sometimes go quiet when something is too large to handle. But Christina has seen it in her daughter's face since then, the way Sadie looks at her now, the weight of what it means to watch your mother change. And yet, despite being bedridden most of the day, despite the pain, despite the isolation, Christina makes herself get up and drive her daughter to school. Every day she can manage it. She has said it is her favorite part of the day, the only time they have completely alone together, just the two of them in the car. She tells herself, just get her there safely and get home so you can get back into bed. And that's what she does. That detail is the whole story, really. Not the lesions, not the Emmy appearance, not the memoir. The fact that a woman who says she lives in hell gets out of bed and drives her kid to school because that car ride is the one thing she refuses to let the disease take from her. That is who Christina Applegate is, what she's leaving behind, and For who? There are a few ways to understand why Christina Applegate wrote a memoir at 54, bedridden, in pain, with a disease that has no cure and a trajectory she can't control. The simple answer is that she wanted to tell the truth for the first time. She has been performing a version of herself, lighter, funnier, more together, for essentially her entire life. She said it directly. She had been playing a character called Christina for 40 years because she thought it was easier, because she didn't want to make people uncomfortable. The memoir, You with the Sad Eyes, is her way of retiring that performance. The book covers territory that is genuinely new. Her mother's addiction, the abuse she experienced between ages 3 and 7, the body dysmorphia that ran alongside her entire career, the double mastectomy, the ovary removal, and then the MS and the wheelchair, and the 30 lesions, and the bedridden days, and the car rides to school. She appeared on Jimmy Kimmel Live to talk about the book, and even there, in what could have been a promotional moment, she was characteristically honest. She said, "It's really painful, and I'm so sorry if it's really tragic to you, but it's kind of a tragic story about my life." She also showed how she's found a way to live with some humor inside the tragedy. She has given her limbs individual names. Her arms are Barbara and Stanley. One leg is Meghan Markle, the other is Tootie. When her limbs don't cooperate, she talks to them. It's absurd, and it works. And it is the most Christina Applegate solution to an impossible situation you could imagine. She said she wrote the book because she believes books can make people feel less alone. That's not a marketing line, it's the actual reason. She has spent most of her MS journey in isolation, and she knows what it feels like to have a body that nobody else can see from the outside. A disease they call invisible, precisely because the pain doesn't show up in photos or casual conversation. She wants someone else who is lying in their own bed, screaming from their own pain, to read her words and feel a little less alone in it. And she wants Sadie to understand her. Not just the mother she has now, but the little girl she was before she became anyone at all. The girl with the sad eyes who grew up in Laurel Canyon, who learned to be funny because it was easier than being honest, who survived cancer and came back, who kept showing up to set in a wheelchair because she wasn't done yet. What are your thoughts about Christina Applegate experience? Share with us in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.